Hey, good Saturday evening to one and all. This is Melvin here, and how's everyone doing? Um, today I want to talk about something that I believe has always been on your mind, especially if you are if you run your own thing, you kind of do your own thing. It is inevitable that at some point in time you may have this thought in your head, and it is, when to quit. Um, the life of an entrepreneur sometimes goes through like a emotional roller coaster. You can feel like so pumped one day, and then the next day you could feel like you're so down, and the next day you feel like you just want to quit. Everything is just not going according to plan, and then another day you just feel like nothing is worthwhile doing whatever it is that you're doing. And then from time to time you kind of like go up and down in terms of this mood swings itself. And I must admit that is something that I have been experiencing. So one of the things that I do to kind of counter that is as follows, right? So during the course of the week, sometimes you start off with a high, you goes into a dip midweek, and then towards the end of the week, sometimes it goes back high again, or sometimes it kind of go down even further. And so what I've been doing is, I've been recording on a daily basis my mood. So I kind of give myself a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being like, it's everything is going to fall apart. And 10 is like, I'm the top of the world. I made a sale and all that stuff. And so every day I rate my mood based on that skill itself. And what I've been observing was that when I started documenting the mood, I realized that I would start off in the morning at a pretty low level, sometimes even less than 5, and towards the end of the day, I would end up like a 6 or 7. And sometimes I may start a day at a high, like 8 or 9, for example, and then you kind of stay consistent. But sometimes, there are days where I start with a high, I end with a low. And so what allowed me to do when I started documenting all this was I began to see if there was a trend. So essentially it's about collecting as much data as you can, as objective as possible, and then looking at those data and then looking out for correlations. Like, for example, when I'm feeling down in the morning, what was I facing? Was there a specific event that was going to happen in the day that resulted in me feeling this way, or what is it, right? And then I try to look at, when I start off the day with a high, what was the events that occur that allow me to start off the day with a high. And after a while, once I have sufficient data to validate that, it allows me to take stock and to know, to know that if you want to have that consistent level of a high every day, then this is some of the things that I should do. So one of the things that I have been doing is that every morning, one of the first things that I do is, when I get up, I drink at least, 500 ml to 1 liter of water to get myself hydrated. And then after that, I would sit down and I would read the Bible, and I would look at, a specific verse, and I would use that verse to ask God to kind of guide me in terms of how can I apply it to for that day. Because one of the key things is, I look to God's word for hope. And I do not just want to be a reader. I do not just want to be someone who knows the word, but I also want to be able to apply it to my life, right? And set that exact example for my kids, for example. And so when I notice that when I get those things done early on in the morning, I get a sense of calm. I get a sense of, I'm in control, rather than, when I wake up late and then I realize that, everybody is already awake and there is email for me to answer. There is all this stuff for me to look at. And, I'm still like trying to get out of bed. And that creates a lot of anxiety. That creates a lot of feeling of overwhelm. And especially when you realize that, you gotta handle some of these things relating to clients' work, and you haven't done your morning routine, and that really throws me off. And so based on that, I then kind of redesign my morning in such a way that allows me to be very focused on my intention, and that kind of helps me lead the rest of the day. And then I found that for myself in the first half of the day, which means before lunch, the first half of the day, it's usually where I get the most thinking work done. What I mean by that is this is time where I do the strategizing, I do the thinking about what are the things that I need to do. I review the goals and my objectives and key results. And as a result of that, I look at what are some of the results that I want to achieve for that day. And when I do that, in the first half of the day, when I get a chance to, sometimes I don't, because sometimes in the morning you got to go see a client or something like that. But when I get a chance to do that, I feel that I feel that I'm more productive, as well as for the second half of the day, where especially when my energy is coming down, I do not have to think anymore. I just have to execute on it. And so that kind of allows me to do it like in the early part of the day, the first half of the day, to really do the heavy lifting, the heavy cognitive level kind of work. And then in the afternoon, that's where my biorhythm is not suited for doing that kind of work, and that's where I get down into much more of the execution bit, which doesn't require high level of thinking, but just knowing what I'm doing and getting it executed and doing it well, right? So that's kind of like allows me to manage my day better. And of course, as for people like us, the better we manage our day, the better we can manage our day, the more productive we can be. And the more productive we can be, the more we get things done, right? And so, today, one of the key questions that came up was, how do I know when to quit? How do I know when to quit? And so if you have ever had that thought in your head, then I think these are the three things that you need to think about. These are the three criteria. So number one, let's get this out of the way. Number one is opportunity cost. How do you know when to quit? You know when to quit when whatever you're giving up, it's potentially probably able to give you more in return for your time than whatever you're doing now, right? And opportunity cost, it's something that's really, something that's real, because sometimes opportunity comes up and you have to make a choice whether to accept it or not. So for instance, a earlier this year, I had an offer from a client to actually retain me, not as a vendor, but as an employee, right? She really thought that, you know, I would be an asset to the team because of my strategic level of thinking and the manner in which I'm able to lead the team in the execution of the whole process itself. You know, and it was, I mean, on one hand, it's flattering because you kind of know that the work that you do, it's being valued, and that people actually value the work that you do. And I mean, this is great affirmation, right? But at the same time, you know, one has to examine and say that, well, you know, if I'm going to accept this, what am I giving up? And sometimes what you're giving up is not just, you know, the income, but also the flexibility and the freedom that you have when it comes to, you know, doing your own thing. So for me, for example, you know, I think at this stage of my life, having that flexibility, it's really, really important to me because, you know, my kids are still young, and I want to be with them as much as I can, right? Because I believe that it is during this time that if I'm able to establish that rapport, the bond with them, you know, in the teenage years, I would expect that we will better be able to relate to one another. So I mean, I was just glad that, you know, for both my kids, for the first 7 years of their lives, both my wife and I, we were very involved with them. And so we know that, you know, the bond has really been built, and we have almost always, in fact, we have always been that significant adult for them, right? It was never a teacher, it was never a helper, it was never a grandparent, but it was us. And we deliberately wanted it that way because we wanted to make sure that, you know, I always joke that, you know, if they screw up, I know it's on me, right? Because it is in their formative years, they purely had us to be with, and especially during our 1 year trip itself, you know, 365 days they were with us all the time. Right? They have never left our side except for one day for a couple of hours, right? They have never left our side. And so, you know, they have always been with us, and the bond that we were able to create as a family is just phenomenal. And I felt that, you know, that is something that you need to do at an early stage where they still think that, you know, you are everything to them. And that they had that affinity with you. And so when it comes to opportunity cost, it's not just about the income that you are giving up. So for example, for me, you know, when I got that offer, I evaluated and I said that, well, you know, potentially if I do my own thing, I could earn, I definitely will be able to earn more than what she's offering me. Plus, in addition to that, if I were to take up the job, yes, it would be great learning opportunity because, you know, the kind of work that we were going to do was going to be really, really exciting. But that said, you know, I would have to give up a fair bit of my freedom. And at this point in time, I'm just not prepared to do that. And so that's the opportunity cost I'm prepared to take. So the first criteria that, you know, you really want to consider when to quit is thinking about opportunity cost. Now, once, you know, you have gotten way past that, the next criteria for you to think about when you are thinking about quitting, it's well-being, right? And when I say well-being, you know, my focus is especially on the emotional as well as the mental part. You see, I mean, there was a time in my life, especially, you know, in 2000 when I joined the earlystage.com as a CEO, that during that time in my life, it was the worst time in my life ever. Why? Because, you know, every day we were living in fear because, you know, any day we could go out of business and and it was so tough. I mean, building a company from scratch, it is so tough, and it requires so much of you that, at a point in time, I was just probably not mature enough to be willing to give it my all. And so, it began to have a toll on my mental well-being, because I was just totally stressed up every day. I was just totally, thinking about going to work was not a pleasant thought every day, and it was just eating into me. And during that time itself, I was just fueled by two things: coffee and cigarettes, which was terrible. I mean, it was so terrible that I couldn't even think about it. So if it is that bad, whereby every day is just so bad that sometimes you can't even bring yourself to work. And trust me, I'm sure those of you here, some of you will experience that, right? I mean, if it's so tough, then you probably should consider to quit. So that's criteria number 2, your well-being. And criteria number 3 is probably the toughest one. Criteria number 3 is it's ego. I met a couple of people who refused to quit because of their ego, right? And so at some point in time, it's either your ego has to go, or your lifestyle has to go. And so hanging on to the fact that, hey, I'm cut out for this, I want to prove to others and all that stuff, just purely because of ego, that's why you hang on to it, even though you're miserable, even though you know that the opportunity cost, it's far greater for you to stay where you are than to quit. Then I think that is silly, right? So you got to learn how to put ego aside and say that, well, by quitting now doesn't mean you have failed. It just means that you are taking a pause, you decide to do something else, and then you may come back to it again. Who knows, right? I mean, as long as every day you can draw a breath, there is always an opportunity, right? So I believe some of us, and on this platform itself, we kind of grapple with that aspect about, we started something and we're not quite sure, like, hey, it seems to be moving, it seems not to be going anywhere. So should I stay or should I go? And sometimes, that in itself, it's really, really damaging, right? So I think, the crucial thing for you to think about is as follows. First, to ask yourself about the opportunity cost, right? I mean, by staying put, are you giving up something that could potentially give you more income and also, time, freedom, right? That's number 1. Number 2, it's really looking at, is it positive to your well-being? Because bear in mind that if it's affecting you in terms of your well-being, what's going to happen is, you're gonna transfer some of that negativity to your family, to your loved ones, to your friends, to your community, and that is not good, right? And the third thing is really it's to think about, are you holding on to this because of ego? And don't let ego get in the way, right? Because just quitting now doesn't mean you're failed. It just means that now's not the right time. You probably come back to this, and there is always a possibility for you to come back again. So my friends, when to quit, when all these 3 criteria are met, it's time to let go. Until then, this is Melvin Tan signing off. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye bye.